I'm going to show you 4 simple ways that you can make SharePoint easier to use for your team. I've got my client Charlotte with us today. Charlotte is the general manager of a restaurant in London and they are struggling to adopt SharePoint. It's just not working for them.
SharePoint has been a disaster for us, Matt. It's too confusing for the staff to use. We hate files opening in the web apps.
Now, by default, when you open a file in the SharePoint web browser, it's going to open in the web version of Microsoft Office. Most people hate that, me included. That's because the web version of Office does contain some limitations and it works and feels a bit different. Similarly, if you're opening a file via Microsoft Teams, that file will open in Microsoft Teams instead of the desktop version of Microsoft Office that we're all used to using. I'm going to show you how to really easily change those default settings so that for everyone on your SharePoint site, the file will open in the desktop version of Office. Let's have a look. All right, so I can see, Charlotte, that you've got one document library on your SharePoint site. A document library is a top-level file repository. And by default, you'll have one called Documents, and I can see we've got a few subfolders in here. Now, you can change for different document libraries the default file open behavior, but you can also set it for the whole SharePoint site. So unless you've got some folders where you want the default open behavior to be different for some reason, then you should just apply this setting for the site. What I'm going to do is click on the settings in the top right, click on site information, and then we're going to click view all site settings. If we scroll down here, we've got Site Collection Administration, and the setting we're looking for is Site Collection Features. Click on that. And now we're looking for a setting called Open Documents in Client Applications by default. And I can see that's about halfway down the page here. All you need to do is click on Activate. There we go. So now anytime I click on a Microsoft Office file in SharePoint, it's going to open in the desktop version of Office. So let's just demonstrate that. If I go to my Documents library and click on this file here, this has opened straight away in my desktop Word application. And I can see that autosave's turned on and it hasn't downloaded the file. It's effectively streaming the file. So if I close this file, it's not saved on my computer. I am saving the changes on this file in real time. And another benefit of this is if one of my colleagues comes into this file, whether they come in via Teams, OneDrive, or the SharePoint web interface like I just did, we can all collaborate on the file at the same time. If one of my colleagues opens the files, I'll actually see it at the top there, their initials, and I'll see what they're doing in real time. So that's made things a lot easier. You don't now have to use the web apps. You'd also change this setting in Microsoft Teams. However, the Microsoft Teams setting cannot be applied company-wide, and you have to set it on each computer that you use. So you do need to show all of your team how to do this. So we open up Microsoft Teams and click on the 3 dots at the top to open the settings menu and click on settings. If I scroll down on the left-hand side and look for files and links and click on that, and we can see here we've got always open Word, PowerPoint and Excel files, and it's currently set to Teams. So we can change that to browser if for whatever reason you would like it to open in the browser by default, or we can set it to desktop, which is a setting that's generally going to work best for most people. Now, in order to use that functionality, you do need the Microsoft Office desktop application. So if you've only got a 365 Business Basic license and you don't have any other Microsoft Office license installed on your computer, then you will need to use the web apps. So whether I come in via SharePoint or via Teams, we are opening the file in exactly the same way, the user experience is the same, and we're looking at exactly the same data. I hope that solves your problem, Charlotte.
Yes, that's a lot better. My chefs rarely use a computer, so they will probably sync SharePoint with OneDrive to keep it simple. We also struggle with organizing and searching for recipes. We have different types and dietary requirements to consider.
Charlotte, what if I told you that you could apply tags to your files to help organize them, and you could then filter by those tags?
That sounds exciting.
So in SharePoint, you can create custom metadata columns for your files and then filter by them. Why don't we create metadata tags for different types of recipe and checkboxes to say whether they are suitable for vegetarians, vegans, and any other dietary requirements. So there are a couple of different ways that you can work with metadata in SharePoint. You can create managed metadata, which is a way of centrally managing your metadata tags across SharePoint and applying them to document libraries and folders all over the place if you're going to be working with the same kind of metadata for all of your files. I'll do a video on that at some point, so if you're interested, please do subscribe to the channel. But for now, I'm just going to show you the simple way, which is creating extra columns for a document library or a folder. So Charlotte, I can see you've got your recipes in this folder here, and I can also see how it would get a bit messy if we had loads of folders to organize the recipes and then different folders inside those folders indicating whether recipes are suitable for people with different dietary requirements. So this is a perfect use case for using metadata. Now, in order to add columns to this recipes folder, it's going to add them for the whole document library that we've got here. So I'm actually going to create a new document library. Let's go back to the home page for the SharePoint site and click on New and Document Library. And I'm going to click on Blank Library and we're going to call this Recipes. And we're going to leave this box here to say Show in Site Navigation, and I'm going to click Create. Now, by default, everyone that's got access to this restaurant site will also have access to this new recipes library that I have created here. So let's get our files moved across. So we're going to go back to Documents and click into Recipes. And I'm going to select all the files and click on Move To. And we're then going to just click back to go to Restaurant at the top and click on Recipes and click Move Here. Now, if you're working with hundreds and thousands of files here, this isn't the best way to move them because it can go wrong and it's difficult to track what has been moved. In that case, you need to get someone to help you do a proper migration. But if you've just got a couple of hundred files or less in here, then this method usually works okay. All right, so we can now delete this folder because the files have been moved. So let's go to our recipes library, and here we can add a column. There's a couple of different ways that you can add a column. You can click Add Column here and select your options, or you can go into the library settings. Now, I prefer to go into the library settings to create a new column because it works a bit better and there are a few more options. So I'm going to show you that method. We're going to click on the settings cog in the top right and then click on library settings and more library settings. So this is just going to apply to the recipes library. And I can see them in the right library up here because it says recipes. So you do just want to double check that you're adding it to the right place. And let's go down to where it says columns. So I'm going to click on create a column and let's call this recipe type. So we've got a few different options here. What I want is there to be a choice. So rather than a free text field where they can type information, we want them to be able to select from some predefined choices in this case. So let's type in starter, main, or dessert. And you can come back in here later and amend these or add more options. We also have this checkbox which says require that this column contains information. Now, if you don't want to be constantly chasing your staff, reminding them to apply the recipe type to the files, then you should set this, because then when they're using Microsoft Word or they're uploading a file into SharePoint, it's going to prompt them to set the metadata for the recipe type automatically. So I'm going to set this particular one to yes, because we do want to require that it contains information. If I scroll down here, we do have the option of applying a default value, but I don't want there to be a default value because we're working with food here, and it's really important that we're not applying defaults, especially when it comes to allergy information. So let's click on OK, and let's go back to our recipe library. There we go. So I can see the recipe type column is there, and it's prompting me to update the recipe type for all of these files. Now, you can click onto each one and update the recipe type. So let's set cheesecake to dessert, and that has now been saved. That's one way of doing it. Or if you've got loads of files to do, you can click Edit in Grid View at the top. So chicken wings, let's set that to starter, garlic bread, starter, ice cream, dessert, lasagna main, pizza main and spag bowl main. Really easy. And then you just click exit grid view. Now this won't work. You may get errors if you've got the files open. So you do need to close the files first. So I'm going to click on exit grid view and let's just refresh the page. And my error's gone away and all of these recipe types have been set. So now that I've done that, we can actually click on the recipe type column and filter by. So if we only want to look at mains at the moment, I can click on main and click apply, and I can now just see my mains.
Matt, that's really helpful. We will go ahead and add more columns for our dietary requirements. Another problem we have is with people creating loads of versions of the menus and the waiters and waitresses never know which one to print.
Okay, so we can easily solve that in SharePoint using SharePoint's built-in version control. Let's have a look at some of the different options. So I can see the problem here. We've got all these different versions of the menu and it's almost impossible to work out which one is actually the final one. And it's actually completely unnecessary for us to have all these separate files in the first place. So there's two things I'm going to show you, and one is a way of having draft versions of a file that only people with edit access can see, and everyone else in the business will only see the published version of the file. And the other thing is just showing you how the built-in version control works in SharePoint. Okay, so let's click on this file. If this is the one you want to work with, I'm going to take out version 1.1 from the name. We're still going to call this maybe menu for 2026 because maybe we have a completely new file each year or every season. So menu 2026, and I'm going to add a dessert section. There we go. And if we click on the menu at the top there, I can click on version history and I can see the previous versions of the files. So automatically I can go back and look at an older version. I can see who it was that edited the file, when they edited it, and if I want to roll back, I can just click on restore. So that's one thing. So I can see the latest version there. I can see the version of the file before I changed it, and I've got the restore option at the top there. So this is there by default. So in that case, we don't need all these other versions of the files, and I can just get rid of those. So we can either delete those, or if we're a bit worried about doing that, why don't we create an archive folder and drag them all into there. Now, if you don't want other people in the business to see these files until they've been published, or you're making changes and you don't want them to use the draft versions, there's a simple way of dealing with that. Now, again, we can change the versioning settings per document library. So the settings that I'm going to apply to the menus, I don't really want to apply to everything. So I'm going to create a new document library again. So let's go back to home and click on new and then document library, blank library, and let's call this menus. So let's go to the menus library, click on settings and click on library settings, more library settings. And what we're looking for is versioning settings. So by default, we can see here that it's only creating major versions of files. And that means every time I create a new version of a file, which happens automatically, anytime you make a change to a file, it's published to everybody. So what we want to do is change that to create major and minor draft versions. And then at the bottom here, we want to change the draft item security so that only users with edit access can see them. So what you can do here, Charlotte, is your waiters and waitresses can be given access to this library with read-only access, and they're only going to see the published versions of the files. And then your restaurant management team can edit these menus. They can all see the drafts that they're working on, safe in the knowledge that one of the waiters or waitresses is not going to accidentally print a new menu that's not been finished.
Sounds brilliant, Matt. Can't wait to see it in action.
So let's add fudge cake here to our desserts and close that file. If I now refresh it and click on my versioning history, we can see here that we have got this draft version of the file and we've got this separate published version or major version of the file. So my waiters and waitresses or anyone else with read-only access to this menus library, when they click on that file, they are only seeing the latest version of it, the one that you've published. And then everyone with edit access, when they click on it, they're going to see the version that's being edited. So if we finish making our changes to the menu, we now want to publish this. We can click here and click republish, and we can add some comments so we can see what has actually changed. So added fudge cake. And there we go. So that menu has now been published to everybody. So we go back to the version history settings, and we can see here there are no current draft versions, and this version has now been published to the whole business. So everyone is now going to be looking at this version of the file. And we've got our comments here, which says added fudge cake. So it's really easy for you to see what has changed. Now, if you're going to use this feature, you will need to do a bit of training with your team, Charlotte, because it does require people to understand and remember to publish the menus when they're finished. So it's really important that you do that training with your team. You show them how to use this, and you get them all consistently adding their comments, explaining what has changed. But once you've done that, this is relatively straightforward to use.
Brill, love it. I'll get on that team training. The last big issue we have is with files not opening because the file path is too long.
Okay, so there are a couple of ways that you can fix that, Charlotte. Let's take a look at your folder structure. You can see here we've got a really long named folder there and a load more subfolders and files with really long names. First thing I'll point out, probably stating the obvious here, is you need to avoid having really deep folder structures and really long folder names. So I really need a whole sentence here, or can we just rename that to Restaurant Ideas 2026? So that's the first thing you can do. Now, if you've had years of bad practice and you've got folders all over the place with really long names, it can be a really long and tedious task to sort out. What you want to do is just start with the folders right at the top of the folder structure, because that's then going to impact everything, and work your way down when you get time. Okay, so that's the first point. The next thing I'll point out is that because we are working with a website, SharePoint is a website, whether you're using OneDrive or Teams, every single space is actually 3 characters. So you want to come up with a naming convention that doesn't involve using spaces. So if we rename that, we can either get rid of the spaces altogether and use capitals. It's still a bit hard to read that. Or we can do something like use dots, dashes, or underscores. So I'm going to just use underscores here in this case. There we go. So those spaces, so if we just refresh that, those spaces were using a total of 6 characters, and just by changing 2 of them, we're now only using 2 characters. The next thing that you can do is when you create a new document library is create it with an abbreviation first. It's important to understand once you create a document library, you can rename it, but you can't change the file path. You can with a subfolder like we've just done, but it doesn't work that way for a document library. So what you want to do is go back onto the home here, and when you create a new document library, create it with a 3-letter abbreviation. It doesn't matter too much what you use. So in terms of recipes, I could have just gone with REC for recipes. We can give it a description there and show that in the site navigation. Okay, so that's now called rec, which to a lot of people may not mean much. So we're going to still change the name of this here. So we're going to click on settings, click on library settings, and we're going to change that name to recipes. Now I've already got one called recipes, so I'm just going to call this recipes folder for now. And I'm going to have to just edit my menu on the left there. So in terms of user experience, people are just seeing the word recipes. When they come in here, they're just seeing recipes, but in the URL at the top, we just have REC 3 letters. I hope you found that video useful, and if you did, please do me a favor and hit that subscribe button and turn those notifications on. I'd love to hear from you in the comments too. See you next time.